The day my daughter, Emily, married Marcus was supposed to be one of the happiest of my life. I had envisioned this day countless times since her mother, my beloved Sarah, passed away nearly 15 years ago. I pictured myself standing tall, a proud father, giving her away to a man who would cherish her as much as I did, as much as Sarah would have wanted. Little did I know, this day would also be the one where her groom, a man I had welcomed into my home and my heart, would call me a loser in front of a room full of people. I recall the way the sunlight streamed through the grand windows of the ballroom at the Ashton Manor in Ascot Downs that afternoon, hitting the crystal chandeliers and making them sparkle like 1,000 tiny diamonds. Every detail, from the exquisite floral arrangements to the string quartet playing softly in the corner, was precisely as Emily had dreamed. And I, Julian Croft, a simple, hard-working man of 58, had made sure of it. My life in Ascot Downs, Virginia, has always been about quiet dedication. I built my small, successful architectural drafting firm from the ground up, brick by brick, blueprint by blueprint. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, it was steady, and it provided well for my family. After Sarah left us, Emily became my world, my reason for everything. I poured every ounce of my love, every spare dollar, every waking thought into her. She wanted for nothing. I sent her to the best schools, paid for her study abroad trips, bought her a reliable car, and later, a down payment on her first apartment in Richmond when she landed her first big job. I did it gladly. My parents, God rest their souls, had left me a substantial inheritance. It wasn't the kind of wealth that makes headlines, but it was enough to ensure I could live comfortably, and more importantly, ensure Emily would always have a safety net, a foundation upon which to build her own dreams. I always envisioned that money would eventually be hers, a gift from 2 generations of Crofts, a legacy of security and love. Emily was a bright, vivacious girl, sometimes a little headstrong, but I always put it down to her youth and independent spirit. When she met Marcus, a charismatic, sharp-suited man who claimed to be in finance, I was initially optimistic. He was charming, attentive, and seemed to adore Emily. He came from a family with old money, or so he said, and had an air of sophisticated confidence that I, a man who preferred a good book and a quiet evening, lacked. I wanted Emily to be happy, truly happy, and if Marcus was the man who could bring that joy into her life, then I would embrace him as my own son. I offered to pay for the entire wedding, a grand affair she insisted upon, saying it was her dream. Marcus had grand ideas too, suggesting a venue that cost more than my first house and a caterer famous for their exorbitant prices. I swallowed my concerns, telling myself it was a once-in-a-lifetime event. My daughter deserved the best. I pulled from my savings, from my investments, from that inheritance fund I had held onto so carefully. It was all for Emily. I saw myself as the provider, the silent supporter, the rock. I didn't need thanks, just her happiness. I just wanted to see her smile, to know she was loved and secure. But beneath the surface of my quiet generosity, a storm was brewing, a storm I was completely unaware of until it broke upon my unsuspecting ears. First crack in my perfect picture of Emily's happiness and my role in it came subtly a few weeks before the wedding. I had driven down to Richmond to help Emily with some last-minute errands. She was living in the apartment I had helped her buy, a lovely place with high ceilings and a view of the city park. I had arrived a little earlier than planned, hoping to surprise her with her favorite coffee. As I approached the door, I heard voices from inside. It wasn't unusual for Marcus to be there. I reached for my key, the one she had given me for emergencies, but then I stopped. Their voices were clearer now, not raised but distinct, and the words, oh, the words, they cut through the air, through my heart with an icy precision. Honestly, Emily, Marcus was saying, his voice dripping with an almost condescending amusement, your father is such a provincial old man. He still drives that old sedan, bless his heart. And his suits. Did you see the one he picked out for the wedding? It's practically antique. Emily giggled, a light, airy sound that usually brought a smile to my face, but now it felt like a dagger. Oh, Marcus, you know Dad, he's set in his ways, but that's why he's so predictable, easy to manage. My hand froze on the doorknob. Easy to manage. The phrase echoed in my mind, hollow and cold. Marcus continued, exactly. He's so wrapped up in playing the doting father he'll never suspect a thing. I mean, the wedding alone must be costing him a small fortune. And he just keeps writing checks, no questions asked. Well, he does have that big inheritance, Marcus, Emily said, a hint of greed in her tone I had never heard before. He always said it was for my future, and it will be so much better for our future if we can encourage him to hand it over sooner rather than later. Imagine what we could do with that capital. Your investment opportunities would really take off. Exactly, my dear, Marcus purred. And once we have control of his assets, we can gently ease him into retirement. Maybe a nice little assisted living facility. Out of sight, out of mind. No more awkward visits from your dear old dad in his antiquated suits. Emily laughed again, a full, unrestrained laugh that crushed my soul. Oh, Marcus, you're terrible, but you're right. He's already given us the down payment on the house we picked out, and he's paying for the entire honeymoon. He's practically an ATM with a pulse. And so easily swayed by a few tears and a "Daddy, I love you so much." It's almost too easy. My breath caught in my throat, my vision blurred. I felt a dizzying wave of nausea wash over me. I stumbled back from the door, careful not to make a sound. The coffee cup I held trembled in my hand. Easy to manage, an ATM with a pulse, a provincial old man, assisted living, my daughter, my own flesh and blood, and the man who was supposed to become my son-in-law. They were not just talking about money. They were talking about my life, my dignity, my very existence, as if I were a burden to be conveniently discarded. The pain was physical, a sharp, searing agony in my chest. My world, which I had so painstakingly built around Emily, around the memory of Sarah, around the quiet values of honesty and love, crumbled into dust. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a profound, soul-deep rupture. I had sacrificed so much, given so freely, loved so completely, and it had all been for this. To be mocked, manipulated, and ultimately cast aside. For a long moment I stood there in the hallway, the sounds of their laughter and cruel planning still ringing in my ears. I wanted to burst through that door, to confront them, to scream, to demand answers. But a colder, more deliberate thought began to form in the swirling chaos of my mind. What would that accomplish? They would deny it, twist my words, make me out to be the irrational old man they already believed me to be. No, confronting them now would only give them ammunition, or worse, warn them. They would find another way to get what they wanted. A raw, quiet anger began to simmer beneath the surface of my grief. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about respect, about integrity, about the very essence of who I was, and they had trampled all over it. I took a deep, shuddering breath, straightened my tie, and carefully, silently turned and walked away from that apartment door. The coffee cup, still clutched in my hand, was now cold, and so was a part of my heart. But in that coldness a new resolve began to harden, a quiet determination to show them exactly what kind of loser they were dealing with. They thought I was an ATM. Well, an ATM could also dispense justice, couldn't it? The game, I realized, had just changed. And I was going to play along, right up until the very end, until the trap snapped shut. The days and weeks leading up to the wedding became a carefully orchestrated performance on my part. I moved through my routines, attended fittings, taste-tested cakes, and discussed seating charts, all with a placid, smiling face. Inside, however, my mind was a whirlwind of strategic planning. The pain of the betrayal was a constant, dull ache, but it was now overshadowed by a calm, calculated anger. They believed I was oblivious, a senile old man. I would let them continue to believe that, right up until the moment it mattered most. My first step was a visit to Mr. Henderson, my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with kind eyes who had handled my affairs for years. I sat across from her polished mahogany desk, feeling a knot of nerves in my stomach. Explaining the situation was difficult, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Mr. Henderson," I began, my voice steady, "I need to make some significant changes to my estate plan, effective immediately." I laid out the details of what I had overheard, the casual cruelty, the explicit plans. She listened patiently, her expression growing increasingly grim. When I finished, she simply nodded, her jaw tight. "Julian," she said softly, "that is truly despicable, but you've come to the right place. We will ensure they get exactly what they deserve and nothing more. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked tirelessly. I had always intended to leave the bulk of my estate, including the substantial inheritance from my parents, to Emily. My will clearly stated this. Mr. Henderson quickly drafted a new one. This new document removed Emily as the primary beneficiary. In her place, I designated a charity dear to my late wife's heart, the Sarah Croft Memorial Scholarship Fund, which provides financial aid for underprivileged students pursuing degrees in the arts. It was a cause Sarah had passionately supported, and it felt right to honor her legacy in this way. I also included a clause ensuring a generous stipend to my longtime housekeeper, Maria, who had been with our family for over 20 years, and a small trust for my nephew, David, a struggling but incredibly kind young man who was working 2 jobs to put himself through nursing school. These were people of true integrity and loyalty, people who deserved my generosity far more than Emily and Marcus ever would. Next, we focused on my assets. I instructed Mr. Henderson to set up an irrevocable trust for the new beneficiaries, ensuring that the funds would be transferred immediately upon my decision, making it impossible for anyone to contest or reverse later. I transferred the majority of my liquid assets, including the entirety of my parents' inheritance, into this new trust. Mr. Henderson advised me to keep a small amount of operating capital in my personal accounts, just enough to maintain the illusion of my regular financial state for a little while longer. We meticulously documented everything, every change, every signature. I wanted no loopholes, no gray areas. This had to be ironclad. While Mr. Henderson handled the legalities, I took care of other arrangements. Emily and Marcus had been eyeing my house in Ascot Downs, casually suggesting it would make a wonderful family retreat once I was older and needed less space. They were hinting at moving me out, plain and simple. I immediately updated the deed to my property, removing Emily as a joint tenant, a mistake I had made years ago, out of love and trust, and placing it entirely in the trust with a life tenancy for myself, ensuring I could never be forced out. I also changed the locks discreetly after subtly retrieving the spare key I knew Emily still possessed. Small details, perhaps, but they brought a quiet satisfaction. During this time, Emily and Marcus continued their charade. They would call, brimming with demands for last-minute wedding expenses. "Daddy, the florist needs another $3,000 for the upgraded peonies." Or "Julian, darling, Marcus's cousins are flying in from Europe. We absolutely must put them up in the presidential suite. It's only fair." Each time I would sigh, feign a slight exasperation, and write the check. I even allowed Marcus to help me with some of my own investments, pretending to be swayed by his confident talk of market trends. I let him believe he was gaining access to my portfolio, watching him preen with self-importance as I subtly moved my real assets out of his reach. He would talk about our future plans with my money, oblivious to the fact that I was meticulously building a future entirely without him or Emily. Their arrogance was truly astounding. They were so consumed by their greed, so convinced of their own cleverness, that they saw nothing. They just saw a slow, old man, a wallet on legs, ready to be drained. It fueled my resolve. Every check I wrote, every polite nod I gave, every feigned sigh, was another brick in the wall I was building around myself, around my true intentions. They thought they were building their empire on my back, but I was simply laying the foundation for their spectacular fall. And the stage for that fall, I knew, would be the wedding itself. The air in the ballroom was thick with anticipation, the scent of expensive flowers mingling with the subtle aroma of gourmet food. The wedding reception was in full swing. Emily, radiant in her elaborate white gown, was laughing loudly with Marcus by her side. They looked every inch the perfect, glamorous couple, surrounded by their friends and a few bewildered relatives who likely had no idea of the depths of their character. I had just finished a rather bland conversation with Emily's Aunt Carol about the price of eggs, when the music swelled, and Marcus, with a confident smirk, tapped a fork against his champagne flute. The room quieted, a murmur of excitement rippling through the guests. It was time for the groom's speech. Marcus, looking impeccably suave in his tailored tuxedo, strode to the microphone. He cleared his throat, flashed a dazzling smile, and began his address, ostensibly to Emily, but really it felt like a performance for the entire room and particularly for me. He spoke of love, of future, of dreams, all the usual platitudes. Then his eyes met mine across the room. A flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Was it triumph, scorn? Crossed his face before he continued, his voice adopting a slightly more casual, almost mocking tone. And of course, he began, a chuckle escaping his lips, I must thank Emily's father, Julian. He's been incredibly generous, truly. He's made sure Emily has everything she could ever want and then some. A real provider, our Julian. He might not understand the complexities of modern finance or the nuances of high society, but he certainly knows how to sign a check, bless his simple heart. A few polite chuckles rippled through the room. Emily giggled a little too loudly, then looked at me with a smirk that felt like a slap. My heart, which had been beating a slow, steady rhythm of anticipation, now throbbed with a cold fury. A simple heart. He might not understand. A provider who just signs checks. He was publicly painting me as a clueless old man, a mere ATM. This was it. This was the moment. The insult wasn't just implied, it was blatant, designed to diminish me in front of everyone I knew. I felt a strange calm wash over me. The pain of the betrayal, the quiet anger, it all coalesced into a laser-like focus. I waited for Marcus to finish his speech, which he did with another smug grin, raising his glass to Emily. Everyone applauded, and the chatter began to resume. I took a deep breath. My hands didn't tremble. My voice, I knew, would be perfectly steady. I stood up slowly from my table. The movement caught a few eyes. I walked with deliberate, unhurried steps towards the small stage where the microphone still stood. Emily saw me and frowned, her eyes questioning. Marcus looked surprised, then annoyed. He probably thought I was going to give some rambling, sentimental father of the bride speech that would bore everyone. He didn't know I was about to deliver his eulogy. I reached the microphone, adjusted it slightly, and tapped it. The light ping cut through the room's ambient noise. All eyes turned to me. I looked out at the assembled guests, then directly at Emily, and finally at Marcus, who now had a confused, slightly wary expression on his face. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and surprisingly resonant in the hushed room. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate Emily and Marcus's union. It is indeed a momentous occasion." I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the room. As the father of the bride, it is customary for me to offer a few words of wisdom and perhaps a gift to the happy couple. Emily beamed, her earlier frown replaced by an expectant smile. Marcus straightened his shoulders, a look of smug anticipation returning to his face. They clearly expected another check, another token of my generosity. "For many years," I continued, my voice softening just slightly, "my greatest joy has been providing for Emily. My late wife, Sarah, and I always dreamed of her having a life filled with security and happiness. And part of that security for me came from the inheritance my own parents left me. It was a substantial sum, enough to provide a very comfortable cushion for my own later years, and indeed, a significant legacy for my daughter." I looked at Emily. Her eyes glittered with barely concealed avarice. Marcus shifted, a hungry look in his eyes. "I always envisioned," I said, looking back at the microphone, my voice gaining a quiet steeliness, "that upon my passing, or perhaps even before, a large portion of that inheritance would go directly to Emily. It was meant to be her foundation, her safety net, a continuation of our family's unwavering support." I paused again, letting the words hang in the air, letting them truly believe they were on the cusp of receiving their perceived prize. Then I met Marcus's eyes, holding his gaze. His smugness was still there, but a flicker of unease was starting to show. "However," I continued, my voice now devoid of any warmth, "life has a way of revealing true character, and sometimes one learns that the most generous intentions can be misunderstood, or perhaps even mocked." I let that word hang in the air, a subtle accusation. The murmur of the room intensified. Emily's smile wavered. "In fact," I pressed on, "I've learned that some people view quiet generosity not as an act of love but as an opportunity. They see a simple heart as easily exploitable. They see a father not as a loving protector but as an ATM with a pulse, an old man whose assets can be managed and whose presence can eventually be, shall we say, eased out. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Gasps broke out. Emily's face went white. Marcus's jaw dropped, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. They absolutely knew I had heard them. So, I said, my voice rising slightly, clear and resonant, it is with a new understanding and a very different kind of intention that I stand before you today. You see, I have indeed gifted my entire inheritance, not in the future upon my passing, but now, this very day. I reached into the inner pocket of my antique suit jacket, the one Marcus had mocked, and pulled out a single, crisp document. It was a notarized letter from Mr. Henderson, confirming the transfer. Just this morning, I signed over the entirety of my parents' inheritance, every single dollar, to a new beneficiary. An irrevocable trust has been established, immediately disbursing these funds to the Sarah Croft Memorial Scholarship Fund. This fund, established in honor of my late wife, will provide educational opportunities for deserving young artists who genuinely seek to enrich the world, not just their own pockets. I held the document aloft for a moment, letting everyone see it. The silence in the room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. Emily was staring at me, her eyes glistening, not with tears of sadness, but with pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. Marcus's face was a mask of pale fury, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Furthermore, I added, my gaze fixed on Emily and Marcus, the house in Ascot Downs, which I know some of you have found so appealing, is now also protected within a similar trust, ensuring that its future, like the rest of my assets, will serve a purpose far beyond personal enrichment. The laughter that Marcus and Emily had directed at me, the casual dismissal, the cruel planning, it had been replaced instantly by a silence so profound it was almost sacred. Then a low, guttural sound escaped Marcus's throat. Emily let out a strangled cry, a sound of utter devastation. The tables had turned. The trap had snapped shut, and the look of absolute, soul-crushing regret on their faces was a moment I knew I would savor for the rest of my days. The ballroom erupted. Whispers, gasps, and outright exclamations filled the air. Emily, her face contorted in a mask of fury, shrieked, "Daddy, how could you? What have you done? That was my money." She stumbled towards me, her wedding dress dragging, looking less like a radiant bride and more like a furious banshee. Marcus, who had momentarily frozen in shock, now surged forward, his face purple with rage. "Croft, you old fool, you can't do this. This is insane. This is illegal." I simply held up the document from Mr. Henderson. "It's perfectly legal, Marcus. Every signature is notarized, every transfer executed. The money is gone to the scholarship fund, effective immediately." My voice remained calm, a stark contrast to their escalating panic. Emily started to sob, not from sorrow but from frustrated greed. But our plans, the new house, your retirement," she was practically screaming. "My retirement, Emily," I said, looking at her with a profound sense of detachment, "will be perfectly comfortable. I have enough to live on. And as for your plans, well, you'll have to make new ones. Perhaps ones that don't involve an ATM with a pulse." I turned slightly to face the shocked guests. "I believe," I stated, my voice carrying over the din, "that true wealth is measured not by what you accumulate, but by the integrity with which you live and the genuine good you contribute to the world." A few brave guests, perhaps those who had always found Marcus insufferable, started to clap, slowly at first, then more heartily. Others were simply stunned into silence. Marcus, realizing the gravity of the situation and the public humiliation, launched into a tirade of expletives, threatening lawsuits and ruin. Emily stood beside him, clutching her veil, her beautiful wedding day ruined beyond repair, all by her own actions. I simply shook my head. "Marcus, Emily," I said, looking at them one last time, "I hope you both find happiness, just not at my expense." With that, I placed the document back in my pocket, gave a slight nod to the room, and walked calmly off the stage, past the caterers and the shocked guests. I didn't look back. The sounds of Emily's wails and Marcus's enraged shouting faded behind me as I exited the ballroom. The cool evening air outside was a welcome relief. The aftermath was exactly as Mr. Henderson had predicted. Emily and Marcus tried to contest the trust, claiming I was mentally incapacitated, but my meticulous planning with Mr. Henderson made their efforts futile. She provided irrefutable proof of my sound mind and the legality of the transfers. They spent a considerable amount of money on legal fees, only to be rejected at every turn. Their grand wedding plans, paid for entirely by me, served only as a public stage for their downfall. The story, naturally, spread like wildfire through Ascot Downs and Richmond. Marcus's reputation, already built on shaky ground, crumbled. His supposed investment opportunities dried up as potential clients learned of his true character. Emily lost her job shortly after, largely due to her own public outbursts and what was perceived as her involvement in Marcus's schemes, and the gossip that followed them everywhere. They were ostracized, their once glamorous social circle dissolving overnight. They were, in essence, left with nothing but each other and the bitter taste of their own greed. I, on the other hand, found a profound sense of peace. The initial pain of betrayal slowly receded, replaced by a quiet, unwavering satisfaction. I still grieved for the daughter I thought I had, the one I had loved and sacrificed for. But that daughter, I realized, was an illusion, a figment of my hopeful imagination. The real Emily, the one who saw her father as an ATM, had shown her true colors, and while it hurt, it also set me free. My life in Ascot Downs continued, but with a renewed purpose. I continued to work, though I scaled back my hours. I spent more time reading, gardening, and enjoying the quiet beauty of my home. I became actively involved with the Sarah Croft Memorial Scholarship Fund, meeting the bright, dedicated students whose lives were being genuinely transformed by the generosity of my parents' inheritance. Their gratitude, their genuine aspirations, brought me more joy and fulfillment than I could ever have imagined. David, my nephew, eventually graduated from nursing school and often stopped by to visit, bringing me fresh-baked goods and lively stories. Maria, my housekeeper, now with a secure trust for her own future, continued to be a steadfast and loyal companion. I never heard directly from Emily or Marcus again. I had cut off all contact, and they, I imagine, were too consumed by their own shame and financial woes to attempt anything further. Sometimes, I would hear snippets of news through mutual acquaintances, rumors of their struggles, their strained marriage, their desperate attempts to rebuild. I felt no triumph in their suffering, only a quiet confirmation that justice, in its own slow, elegant way, had been served. True wealth, I learned, isn't about the size of your bank account or the grandeur of your wedding. It's about the richness of your character, the integrity of your actions, and the genuine connections you forge with those who truly deserve your love and respect. My entire inheritance had found its rightful home, not in the hands of the greedy, but in the dreams of the deserving. And that, I realized, was a gift beyond measure, a legacy far more enduring than any amount of money could ever buy. The moment their laughter turned to regret will indeed never be forgotten. It was the moment I truly understood the profound power of elegant justice. The aftermath was exactly as Mr. Henderson had predicted. Emily and Marcus tried to contest the trust, claiming I was mentally incapacitated, but my meticulous planning with Mr. Henderson made their efforts futile. She provided irrefutable proof of my sound mind and the legality of the transfers. They spent a considerable amount of money on legal fees, only to be rejected at every turn. Their grand wedding plans, paid for entirely by me, served only as a public stage for their downfall. The story, naturally, spread like wildfire through Ascot Downs and Richmond. Marcus's reputation, already built on shaky ground, crumbled. His supposed investment opportunities dried up as potential clients learned of his true character. Emily lost her job shortly after, largely due to her own public outbursts and what was perceived as her involvement in Marcus's schemes and the gossip that followed them everywhere. They were ostracized, their once glamorous social circle dissolving overnight. They were, in essence, left with nothing but each other and the bitter taste of their own greed. I, on the other hand, found a profound sense of peace. The initial pain of betrayal slowly receded, replaced by a quiet, unwavering satisfaction. I still grieved for the daughter I thought I had, the one I had loved and sacrificed for. But that daughter, I realized, was an illusion, a figment of my hopeful imagination. The real Emily, the one who saw her father as an ATM, had shown her true colors, and while it hurt, it also set me free. My life in Ascot Downs continued, but with a renewed purpose. I continued to work, though I scaled back my hours. I spent more time reading, gardening, and enjoying the quiet beauty of my home. I became actively involved with the Sarah Croft Memorial Scholarship Fund, meeting the bright, dedicated students whose lives were being genuinely transformed by the generosity of my parents' inheritance. Their gratitude, their genuine aspirations, brought me more joy and fulfillment than I could ever have imagined. David, my nephew, eventually graduated from nursing school and often stopped by to visit, bringing me fresh-baked goods and lively stories. Maria, my housekeeper, now with a secure trust for her own future, continued to be a steadfast and loyal companion. I never heard directly from Emily or Marcus again. I had cut off all contact, and they, I imagine, were too consumed by their own shame and financial woes to attempt anything further. Sometimes I would hear snippets of news through mutual acquaintances, rumors of their struggles, their strained marriage, their desperate attempts to rebuild. I felt no triumph in their suffering, only a quiet confirmation that justice, in its own slow, elegant way, had been served. True wealth, I learned, isn't about the size of your bank account or the grandeur of your wedding. It's about the richness of your character, the integrity of your actions, and the genuine connections you forge with those who truly deserve your love and respect. My entire inheritance had found its rightful home, not in the hands of the greedy, but in the dreams of the deserving. And that, I realized, was a gift beyond measure, a legacy far more enduring than any amount of money could ever buy. The moment their laughter turned to regret will indeed never be forgotten. It was the moment I truly understood the profound power of elegant justice. The days and weeks after the wedding were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering, though from my perspective, it was a calm observation of a storm unfolding elsewhere. Mr. Henderson, bless her steady competence, handled every challenge Emily and Marcus threw our way. Their lawyers, no doubt expensive, initially attempted to invalidate the trust on grounds of undue influence, claiming that I, Julian Croft, a man of 58 years, had been manipulated by some unknown third party. This was quickly followed by accusations of mental incapacity, a desperate attempt to paint me as senile and incapable of making sound financial decisions. Mr. Henderson simply smiled, a tight, professional smile, and produced a battery of documents. My recent medical evaluations showing excellent cognitive function, detailed notes from our meetings outlining my clear and precise instructions, and witness statements from bank officials confirming my lucid demeanor during the transfers. She even presented sworn affidavits from my family doctor and a certified geriatric psychologist, both of whom attested to my robust mental health. The court quickly dismissed their claims. They then tried to argue that the trust somehow violated previous intentions, referring to my old will. But an old will, as Mr. Henderson calmly explained to the judge, is superseded by a new, legally executed one. The irrevocability of the trust meant the funds were gone, legally and permanently out of my control, and thus out of their reach. Each legal challenge was met with an impenetrable wall of documentation and legal precedent. Emily and Marcus, I later heard, were burning through what little savings they had left, trying to fight a battle they couldn't win. The irony was not lost on me. The money they thought they would inherit was now funding their futile attempts to reclaim it, and ironically, enriching a different set of lawyers. The public spectacle of the wedding day, however, was only the beginning of their downfall. News travels fast in towns like Ascot Downs, and faster still when it involves scandal and money. Within days, the story of the father of the bride's unexpected speech had spread far beyond our quiet community. People talked about it at the grocery store, at church, in their garden clubs. The initial shock gave way to a general consensus. What I had done, while dramatic, was undeniably justified. The whispers, which had initially been about the shock of my actions, soon turned to the true character of Emily and Marcus. Old acquaintances started to recall instances where Marcus had been overly pushy about investments, or where Emily had subtly belittled my simple tastes. Their carefully constructed facade of sophistication and success began to crack under the weight of public scrutiny. Marcus's supposed finance career, which I now suspected was far less legitimate than he had portrayed, collapsed almost immediately. His small office in Richmond, which operated more as a front for dubious investment opportunities rather than a reputable firm, saw clients pulling out en masse. The trust in him, fragile at best, evaporated. Who would trust their money to a man publicly exposed as a greedy manipulator, willing to disparage his own father-in-law? I heard that some of his investments were already under review by regulatory bodies, and the heightened attention brought on by the wedding drama only accelerated their collapse. He tried to pivot, tried to rebrand, but the stain of that day followed him like a shadow. His grand plans for wealth and power, which he had so confidently paraded, crumbled into dust. Emily's professional life fared no better. She had been working in a high-profile marketing position at a large corporation in Richmond, a job I had, in fact, helped her secure through some old connections. Her initial reaction to my speech at the wedding had been a public display of raw, unbridled fury. Screaming, crying, accusations hurled not just at me, but at anyone who dared to look her way. Videos of her meltdown, captured on various guests' phones, circulated widely, eventually making their way to the HR department of her company. Her public image, once polished and professional, was shattered. It wasn't long before she was let go, the official reason being a loss of confidence in her ability to represent the company's values. In truth, her colleagues, many of whom had seen the videos or heard the stories, simply didn't want to work with someone so overtly selfish and aggressive. She tried to find another job in Richmond, but the local professional network was small, and her reputation, like Marcus's, preceded her. The once bright future she had envisioned for herself, filled with career advancements and social accolades, became a bleak landscape of rejection and dwindling opportunities. Their lavish lifestyle, funded for so long by my generosity, abruptly ceased. The down payment I had given them for their new, expensive house in a desirable Richmond neighborhood was, of course, gone. It had been part of the overall strategy for my ATM status. Without that down payment, and without Marcus's income or Emily's job, they couldn't secure a mortgage. The house of their dreams remained just that, a dream. I heard they were forced to move out of Emily's apartment, the one I had helped her buy, because she couldn't keep up with the maintenance fees and taxes I had secretly stopped paying after the betrayal. The apartment, now free of their presence, would eventually be sold, and the proceeds, after covering any outstanding expenses, would also go into the scholarship fund, another small victory. They were forced to rent a much smaller, far less glamorous place on the outskirts of the city, a harsh contrast to the high society they had so eagerly embraced. The strain on their marriage was evident to anyone who saw them. The whispers told of public arguments, bitter recriminations, and accusations flying between them. Emily blamed Marcus for his stupid investment schemes, and for not being rich enough to truly support her. Marcus blamed Emily for her spoiled princess attitude, and for not being able to manage her own father better. The love they professed, which I had initially believed to be genuine, proved to be nothing more than a transactional agreement based on my anticipated wealth. Without that wealth, their bond frayed and unraveled, revealing the brittle, selfish core of their relationship. The golden veneer of their wedding day had been stripped away, exposing the tarnished reality of their union. Their happily ever after was a mirage, dissolving under the harsh light of their own avarice. While their world collapsed, mine was quietly rebuilt, stronger and more meaningful than before. The Sarah Croft Memorial Scholarship Fund became more than just a charity. It became a living tribute to my beloved Sarah, and a testament to the idea that good deeds, however quietly done, can truly make a difference. I dedicated a significant portion of my now free time to the fund. I attended board meetings, helped review applications, and even had the privilege of meeting some of the scholarship recipients. There was a young woman named Clara, a talented painter from a struggling background, whose eyes lit up when she spoke of her art. There was Michael, a gifted musician who could not afford conservatory tuition. Helping them, seeing the genuine hope and gratitude in their faces, brought a warmth to my heart that money could never buy. Their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs were real, unlike the artificial drama of Emily and Marcus. They understood the value of an opportunity, the significance of a helping hand. It was in their genuine thanks, their heartfelt letters, and their budding successes that I found true fulfillment. This, I realized, was the legacy I truly wanted to build, not a legacy of material possessions, but one of possibility and genuine human connection. My relationship with Maria, my housekeeper, grew even deeper. She had always been a quiet, hard-working presence in my home, a comforting anchor in the years after Sarah's passing. When I told her about the trust I had set up for her, ensuring her financial security for the rest of her life, her eyes welled up with tears. "Mr. Julian," she had whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "you are too good." She had never asked for anything, had always simply done her work with diligence and care. Now, with the weight of her own financial worries lifted, I saw a lightness in her step, a brighter spark in her eyes. She continued to work for me, but now it was a choice, not a necessity. She became more like family than an employee, sharing her stories, her wisdom, and occasionally her delicious home-cooked meals. Her loyalty, unlike Emily's, was genuine, earned not through expectation, but through mutual respect and kindness. And then there was David, my nephew. He was Emily's cousin, but a world apart in character. He had struggled through his early 20s, making ends meet with odd jobs, but he possessed a deep, unwavering desire to help others, which led him to pursue a nursing degree. I had always admired his tenacity. The small trust I had established for him, while not as substantial as the scholarship fund, was enough to cover his remaining tuition and living expenses, allowing him to quit one of his strenuous part-time jobs and focus fully on his studies. He was overwhelmed with gratitude. When he graduated, he came to my house, a freshly minted registered nurse, his face beaming with pride. He embraced me tightly, a genuine, warm hug I hadn't received from a family member in years. He would often drop by, sharing stories from the hospital, making me laugh, and reminding me that true family connection didn't require blood but rather shared values and respect. He was, in a way, the son I never truly had, a testament to the enduring bonds of genuine affection. My quiet life in Ascot Downs continued, but it was no longer shadowed by the unspoken burden of betrayal. The house, now secured within its trust, felt more like a sanctuary. I walked through the familiar rooms, tended to my garden, and read my books with a lightness of spirit I hadn't felt in years. The antique suit Marcus had mocked me for wearing became a symbol of my enduring character, my steadfast refusal to conform to their shallow values. I thought often of Sarah, and I felt a profound sense of peace, believing that I had honored her memory, not just through the scholarship fund, but by upholding the values we had shared: integrity, generosity, and unwavering love for those who truly deserved it. The occasional whispers of Emily and Marcus's continuing struggles would sometimes reach me. I heard they eventually left Richmond, unable to escape the stigma. Rumors suggested they moved out of state, hoping for a fresh start, but the echoes of their past followed them. Their marriage, already fractured, eventually succumbed to the immense pressure of financial ruin and mutual resentment. I heard they separated, each blaming the other for their spectacular fall. There was no joy in hearing of their misery, no cruel delight in their misfortune. Only a quiet, almost melancholic acknowledgement that they had reaped what they had sown. Their lives, once so full of promise and perceived luxury, had become a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that greed, when unchecked, consumes everything in its path, leaving only bitterness and emptiness. My own retirement, which they had so casually planned to force upon me in an assisted living facility, was now a choice I could make on my own terms. I gradually reduced my hours at the architectural drafting firm, eventually handing over the reins to a bright, young protege I had mentored for years. I continued to advise, to consult, but my days were largely my own. I traveled a bit, something Sarah and I had always dreamed of doing. I explored national parks, visited museums, and simply enjoyed the quiet beauty of the world, free from the weight of expectations and the sting of betrayal. The lessons I learned from that painful chapter of my life ran deep. I understood that love, especially parental love, can sometimes blind us to the true character of those we cherish. It taught me the importance of discernment, of looking beyond charming smiles and grand pronouncements to see the true intentions within a person's heart. And most importantly, it reaffirmed my belief in the power of quiet strength, of methodical planning, and of justice that unfolds not with a bang, but with the elegant precision of a well-laid trap. My final philosophical thought, as I sat on my porch on a warm Ascot Downs evening, watching the fireflies dance, was this: true revenge isn't about inflicting suffering. It's about reclaiming your dignity, redirecting your generosity to where it truly belongs, and allowing the natural consequences of self-serving actions to reveal themselves. It's about transforming a moment of profound betrayal into a lasting legacy of genuine good. That, I decided, was the most satisfying and enduring victory of all. The silence that now filled my home, a silence once filled with the phantom echoes of my daughter's cruel laughter, was now a peace that resonated with the quiet symphony of my own restored integrity. It was the sound of a life truly lived, on my terms, and in honor of the values I held dear. And that, I knew, was a reward beyond all estimation. The silence that now filled my home, a silence once filled with the phantom echoes of my daughter's cruel laughter, was now a peace that resonated with the quiet symphony of my own restored integrity. It was the sound of a life truly lived, on my terms, and in honor of the values I held dear. And that, I knew, was a reward beyond all estimation. The memory of the day of Marcus's shocked face and Emily's enraged shriek was not one of bitterness, but of stark clarity. It was a line drawn in the sand, a boundary asserted, a declaration that my life and my legacy would not be defined by their greed. The wedding guests, those who had looked on in stunned silence, then in murmuring appreciation for my stand, became an unexpected chorus. Their reactions in the immediate aftermath were varied, but largely supportive. Many came to me discreetly, offering words of solace and admiration. Old friends, neighbors I had known for decades, even some distant relatives who had always been wary of Marcus's slick charm, approached me with genuine warmth. They shared stories, subtle hints they had picked up over time, confirming my belated suspicions about the true nature of Emily and Marcus. "We always wondered about that young man, Julian," one kind elderly woman from my church whispered, patting my arm. "He seemed too eager for what you had." Another, a fellow businessman, recounted how Marcus had tried to solicit him for a dubious investment opportunity years prior, which he had wisely declined. The confirmation, though painful, validated my actions. It showed me that others had seen through their facade, even if I, blinded by a father's love, had not. This unexpected wave of support, of understanding, helped to mend the social fabric that Emily and Marcus had tried to tear. It wasn't just my dignity I had reclaimed. It was my place in the community, reinforced by those who truly valued honesty and decency. Meanwhile, the ripples of that wedding day continued to spread, creating ever-widening circles of consequence for Emily and Marcus. The story, embellished with each retelling, became a local legend. Marcus, already on thin ice with his questionable financial dealings, found his professional world crumbling with alarming speed. The public humiliation, the direct exposure of his character as a manipulative opportunist, was a fatal blow to his credibility. His few remaining clients, hearing the detailed accounts of his behavior at the wedding and the subsequent legal battles, quickly severed ties. His supposed investment firm, which I later discovered was little more than a one-man operation peddling high risk, vaguely defined schemes to a small circle of unsuspecting individuals, folded within weeks. Regulatory bodies, prompted by renewed complaints and the high-profile nature of the scandal, began a more thorough investigation into his past activities. It turned out some of his previous ventures were indeed on the fringes of legality, relying on opaque structures and inflated promises. The pressure mounted, and I heard through Mr. Henderson that he faced the very real threat of legal action, not from me, but from the state and disgruntled former clients. His carefully constructed image of a successful financier dissolved into that of a desperate charlatan, and with it, his ability to earn a living in any reputable field. He was forced to liquidate what few legitimate assets he possessed, barely covering the mounting legal fees he incurred trying to fight a losing battle against me, and now, against the authorities. The man who had boasted of his high society, connections, and grand financial acumen was reduced to a pariah, his name synonymous with deceit and failure in Richmond's professional circles. Emily's descent was equally swift, and in many ways, more tragic for me to witness, even from afar. Her public meltdown at the wedding, the recorded videos, the wild accusations she had screamed at me, all contributed to an undeniable stain on her professional reputation. Her high-profile marketing job, which required a polished image and a high degree of client trust, became untenable. The loss of confidence in her ability to represent the company's values was merely corporate speak for "we can't have someone like this working for us." The whispers in the office, the averted gazes, the sudden lack of invitations to company events, it all culminated in her dismissal. She tried desperately to find new employment, but Richmond was not large enough for her to escape the gossip. Every interview was met with polite but firm rejections. Her resume, once impressive, was now overshadowed by the narrative of her public disgrace. She even attempted to apply for positions in smaller towns, hoping to put some distance between herself and the scandal, but the internet has a long memory. A quick search of her name, combined with the detailed accounts of the wedding speech that shocked Ascot Downs, painted a picture no employer wanted to touch. The vibrant, ambitious young woman I had supported, the one I had envisioned soaring in her career, found herself adrift, unemployed, and increasingly isolated. The apartment I had helped her buy, the very place where I had overheard their cruel plans, became a symbol of her crumbling life. I had discreetly stopped making contributions to its maintenance fees and property taxes once the trusts were established, knowing full well she would struggle to shoulder the full burden herself without my ongoing ATM support. With Marcus's income evaporated and her own job gone, she quickly fell behind. The apartment, once a symbol of her independence and burgeoning success, became a source of financial stress and growing debt. Eventually, she was forced to put it on the market. The sale process was slow and difficult, and the proceeds, after paying off the mortgage and outstanding expenses, were far less than she had anticipated. As planned, what little remained would go to the Sarah Croft Memorial Scholarship Fund, a final, poignant redirection of resources that she had once believed was her birthright. The elegant Richmond apartment, now empty, was yet another casualty of her short-sighted greed. It wasn't just money she had lost. It was her home, her career, her standing in society. Their lavish lifestyle, predicated on my perceived endless generosity, vanished overnight. The grand house they had picked out, the one I had promised a down payment for, was now a cruel phantom of what might have been. Without my funds and their combined income, the mortgage application was a non-starter. They couldn't even afford the small, unglamorous rental on the outskirts of Richmond for long. I heard they eventually packed what little they could salvage of their expensive belongings into a U-Haul and left Virginia entirely. The destination was rumored to be a relative's basement in a distant state, a stark and humiliating contrast to the dreams of high society and financial dominance they had so boldly articulated. The strain on their marriage, already visible in the whispers after the wedding, became unbearable. Their bond, built on a foundation of mutual avarice and a shared contempt for my simple heart, quickly fractured without the glue of anticipated wealth. The public arguments grew more frequent and more vitriolic. Emily, stripped of her comfortable life and blaming everyone but herself, turned her venom on Marcus. She accused him of being a fraud, of failing to secure her future, of leading her down a path of ruin. "You promised me a life of luxury, Marcus." I imagined her screaming. "You said my father was easy to manage." Marcus, equally desperate and full of self-pity, retaliated, branding her a spoiled, entitled brat whose own lack of genuine affection had driven her father away. Their shared victimhood, instead of uniting them, became a battleground for bitter recriminations. The love they had paraded, the charming smiles and intimate gestures, evaporated, revealing the hollow core of their transactional relationship. The golden veneer of their wedding day, a day I had paid for, shattered completely, leaving behind only the tarnished reality of their shattered dreams and profound resentment. The final rumor I heard, confirmed by an old family friend, was that they had separated, unable to bear the weight of their failures and the constant, suffocating blame they heaped upon each other. They were two shipwrecked individuals, each pointing fingers, stranded on an island of their own making. Their happily ever after had indeed dissolved into a bleak landscape of individual isolation, a poignant and fitting end to a union founded on such shallow pretense. While their world imploded, mine continued to flourish, anchored by genuine connections and a profound sense of purpose. The Sarah Croft Memorial Scholarship Fund became far more than just a financial entity. It became a living, breathing testament to Sarah's memory and a conduit for true, transformative good. I poured my newly found free time and emotional energy into its development. Attending board meetings was no longer a chore, but an opportunity to shape the futures of deserving young people. I found immense satisfaction in helping to review applications, reading the heartfelt essays of students who, despite incredible challenges, possessed an unwavering passion for the arts. I remember distinctly a young woman named Clara, a painter with a spirit as vibrant as her canvases. She came from a challenging background, facing financial obstacles that would have crushed a less determined individual. When I met her, her eyes, despite the weariness, sparkled with an almost tangible light when she spoke of her art, of colors and forms, of telling stories through brushstrokes. The scholarship allowed her to attend a prestigious art academy, a dream she had thought impossible. I received a handwritten letter from her after her first semester, filled with exuberant descriptions of her classes, her mentors, and the sheer joy of being able to dedicate herself fully to her passion. She even enclosed a small sketch, a beautiful depiction of a quiet forest path, which I still keep on my desk. Another student, Michael, a gifted musician whose fingers seemed to dance effortlessly across piano keys, was on the verge of giving up his dream of attending a conservatory due to his family's inability to afford tuition. The fund provided the crucial support he needed. I later attended one of his recitals, sitting in the audience as his music filled the hall, each note a pure expression of gratitude and talent. Meeting these students, seeing the genuine hope and gratitude in their faces, hearing their stories of triumph over adversity, brought a warmth to my heart that no amount of personal wealth could ever buy. Their aspirations were real, their struggles palpable, and their gratitude, unlike Emily's superficial affections, was deeply sincere. This, I realized, was the true legacy I wanted to build, not a legacy of material possessions hoarded by the undeserving, but one of possibility, of genuine human connection, and of helping dreams take flight. My relationship with Maria, my housekeeper, deepened into one of familial warmth and unwavering loyalty. She had been a quiet, hard-working presence in my home for over 2 decades, a comforting anchor in the empty years after Sarah's passing. Her dedication was never in question, her diligence always impeccable. When I first told her about the trust I had established for her, ensuring her financial security for the rest of her life, her initial reaction was one of stunned disbelief. Then her eyes welled up with tears and she clasped her hands to her chest. "Mr. Julian," she had whispered, her voice thick with emotion, her face etched with a mixture of surprise and profound gratitude, "you are too good, too kind." She had never once asked for more than her fair wages, never hinted at financial struggles, simply performed her duties with quiet grace and care. Now, with the immense weight of her own financial worries lifted, I saw a new lightness in her step, a brighter spark in her eyes, and a quiet joy that was truly infectious. She continued to work for me, but now it was a choice, a continuation of our shared life, not a necessity driven by economic need. She became more like a beloved family member than an employee, sharing her stories, her wisdom, and occasionally her delicious home-cooked meals, infused with the flavors of her heritage. Her loyalty, unlike Emily's transactional affection, was genuine, earned not through expectation, but through mutual respect, kindness, and a shared history. And then there was David, my nephew. He was Emily's cousin, but a world apart in character and values. He had struggled through his early 20s, making ends meet with a series of odd jobs, but he possessed a deep, unwavering desire to help others, a compassionate spirit that ultimately led him to pursue a nursing degree. I had always admired his tenacity, his quiet determination to make a difference in the world. The small trust I had established for him, while not as substantial as the scholarship fund, was enough to cover his remaining tuition and living expenses, allowing him to finally quit one of his strenuous part-time jobs and focus fully on his demanding studies. He was overwhelmed with gratitude, a genuine, humble appreciation that moved me deeply. When he graduated, a freshly minted registered nurse, his face beaming with pride and exhaustion, he came directly to my house. He embraced me tightly, a genuine warm hug I hadn't received from a family member in years. He would often drop by after his shifts, sharing stories from the hospital, making me laugh with his observations about life and people, and reminding me that true family connection didn't require blood, but rather shared values, mutual respect, and authentic affection. He was, in a way, the son I never truly had, a testament to the enduring bonds of genuine care and loyalty. His presence in my life was a balm, a quiet joy that filled a void I hadn't realized was still there. My quiet life in Ascot Downs continued, but it was no longer shadowed by the unspoken burden of betrayal and manipulation. The house, now secured within its trust, felt more like a sanctuary, a haven of peace and integrity. I walked through the familiar rooms, tended to my garden with renewed vigor, and read my books with a lightness of spirit I hadn't felt in years. The antique suit Marcus had mocked me for wearing, the one I had chosen for Emily's wedding, became a quiet symbol of my enduring character, my steadfast refusal to conform to their shallow values. It was a suit of honor, not of outdated fashion. I thought often of Sarah, my beloved wife, and in my quiet moments I felt a profound sense of peace, believing that I had honored her memory, not just through the scholarship fund, but by upholding the values we had shared: integrity, generosity, and unwavering love for those who truly deserved it. The occasional whispers of Emily and Marcus's continuing struggles would sometimes reach me, always through the filter of third-hand accounts. I heard they eventually left Richmond, unable to escape the omnipresent stigma of their actions. Rumors suggested they moved out of state, hoping for a fresh start, a clean slate, but the echoes of their past, the tales of their avarice and public humiliation, seemed to follow them like persistent specters. Their marriage, already fractured beyond repair by their shared downfall and mutual blame, eventually succumbed to the immense pressure of financial ruin and bitter resentment. I heard, with a sigh of melancholic confirmation, that they had separated, each blaming the other for their spectacular fall from grace. There was no joy in hearing of their misery, no cruel delight in their misfortune, only a quiet, almost melancholic acknowledgment that they had indeed reaped what they had sown. Their lives, once so full of promise and perceived luxury, had become a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that greed, when unchecked, consumes everything in its path, leaving only bitterness and emptiness in its wake. They had sought to enrich themselves at my expense, and in doing so, had impoverished themselves in every meaningful way. My own retirement, which they had so casually planned to force upon me in an assisted living facility, where I would be out of sight, out of mind, was now a choice I could make on my own terms, at my own pace. I gradually reduced my hours at the architectural drafting firm, eventually handing over the reins to a bright, young protege I had mentored for years, a young man who shared my values of diligent work and honest craftsmanship. I continued to advise, to consult, offering my experience when needed, but my days were largely my own. I finally found the time to travel a bit, something Sarah and I had always dreamed of doing together. I explored national parks, visited museums that had long been on my list, and simply enjoyed the quiet beauty of the world, free from the weight of expectations and the sting of betrayal. Each sunrise brought a quiet gratitude, each sunset a peaceful reflection. The lessons I learned from that painful chapter of my life ran deep and profound. I understood, with a clarity that had once been obscured by love, that parental affection, particularly for a widowed father, can sometimes blind us to the true character of those we cherish. It taught me the crucial importance of discernment, of looking beyond charming smiles and grand pronouncements to see the true intentions within a person's heart. It instilled in me a renewed appreciation for integrity, for honest relationships, and for the quiet dignity of a life lived with purpose. And most importantly, it reaffirmed my belief in the profound power of quiet strength, of methodical planning, and of a justice that unfolds not with a sudden, violent bang, but with the elegant precision of a meticulously laid trap. My final philosophical thought, as I sat on my porch on a warm Ascot Downs evening, watching the fireflies dance their silent, luminous waltz, was this: true revenge isn't about inflicting suffering, though sometimes suffering is a natural consequence of one's actions. It's about reclaiming your dignity, redirecting your generosity to where it truly belongs, and allowing the natural, unavoidable consequences of self-serving actions to reveal themselves in stark, undeniable clarity. It's about transforming a moment of profound betrayal into a lasting legacy of genuine good, a beacon of hope for others. That, I decided, was the most satisfying and enduring victory of all, a victory that resonated not with bitterness but with a deep, abiding peace. The silence that now filled my home, a silence once filled with the phantom echoes of my daughter's cruel laughter, was now a peace that resonated with the quiet symphony of my own restored integrity, a peace earned through pain but preserved by truth. It was the sound of a life truly lived, on my terms, in honor of the values I held dear, and a reward beyond all estimation. I often mused that while my own father had left me a substantial sum of money, the greatest inheritance he had truly passed on was the wisdom to recognize genuine worth, and the courage to protect it, whatever the cost, even when faced with the deepest familial betrayal. This wisdom, I knew, was a far greater fortune than any bank account could ever hold.